Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Leander. I'm the Member Services Officer with the Global Business School Network. I'm the main point of contact with all of our member schools and partners with our organization. I'm also pleased to introduce Alan Webb from Citizen Circles and Laura White from the Tulane University Changemakers, who are here today to present on the topic. But before I let them start, let me go ahead and do a quick review of GBSN for those of you who don't know who we are. We're a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. We're a network of business schools working to improve management, education, in emerging markets. We do this through two ways. One, through our international development capacity building programs, as well as through our networking and collaboration activities with our member schools and partners, such as this webinar and other activities. We are currently 39 business schools strong. We are all over the world. We do take applications from business schools on a quarterly basis. And again, here's a good reach of our schools throughout the global network. So let me go ahead and pass the presentation over to Alan Webb. Thank you for joining us this morning.
No problem, and thank you for the introduction, Lisa, and thank you all for joining us. We're all here today to talk about peer-to-peer learning, and this is an exciting topic for Laura and I both because it ties together in a really exciting way some of the oldest forms of learning we have with some of the newest, and we're here to help showcase some of the resources that are out there. If you could go ahead and advance, Lisa, that would be great. Just go on straight to the next slide, actually. We're here to showcase not only some of the resources you might think of instantly when you think of online learning or peer-to-peer learning, such as MIT OpenCourseware, but also some of the social tools and what you might even refer to as the social technology for getting groups together in a peer-to-peer fashion to learn from each other in some contexts that maybe are not the traditional. So we'll do that through going through a little bit of the history of both of those things and highlighting some things that we hope will be useful to you. And we'll also give you an example because we find that talking about this topic helps tremendously to have an actual point of reference, an example for you to reflect on.
Alan,
yes.
I apologize to interrupt, but I'm told by the audience that you're very difficult to hear. So if you could go ahead and speak very loud and clearly and also increase the volume of your microphone as well.
No problem. Is this clearer now?
If you could go ahead and send in your chat if you're having difficulty hearing. It's still a little bit quiet, I'm told.
Okay, I will go ahead and see if I can increase that. That'll just take 1 second. So it actually might be good to go ahead to the next slide, Lisa. And while I'm working on doing that, I wanted to start today with a question to the audience about, before we even begin, peer-to-peer learning. That's maybe a jargony word. And I would like to just invite everyone at this time through your chat or through raising your hand to share maybe an image or an idea or an impression of what you think peer-to-peer learning is right now. In the same way that if you asked a child, what is science, someone tends to say Albert Einstein is the most common answer for young children. What is the image or the idea that comes to mind of you all peer-to-peer learning? And if you want to just take a minute to think about that while I work on my microphone, that'd be great. Let's just test this volume level now. Is that any better?
And go ahead, and if you would like to respond to the question, you can do so by chat or by raising your hand and being taken off of mute. I'm told that the volume is much better, so that's great. Thank you, Alan.
No problem. All right, well, let's just go ahead and move on. That is the topic that we're here to explore for today. And just to go ahead and get your sense of what experience you've had with any type of peer-to-peer learning, we do have a poll just so I can get a sense for where you all are coming from. So the question is, what is your highest level of experience with peer-to-peer learning today? And your options are, in the first instance, I've participated in a class where the students were actually asked to help design the syllabus, or maybe at a higher level you participated in a class where students were asked to help teach or facilitate individual classes. At a next level, you might have participated in a class where really the whole thing was designed and facilitated by all the learners together. And maybe if you've never even had anything but this, you might think that the last answer applies to you. So I'll just give you a minute to give us some feedback on where you're coming from at this point. Well, that's great. So it looks like the majority of you have had some experience with either designing the syllabus, helping, or being involved in a class where students are helping design the syllabus, helping facilitate. Maybe 1 out of 5 of you has actually participated in a class where really the whole design of it was peer-to-peer from the beginning to the end. And I'm glad to see 1 out of 10 of you just really enthusiastic about this idea, and that's great to hear. So maybe we can go on to the next question. So we'll be going into this a little bit more detail directly after this, but I'm just wondering, as a bit of trivia, what country today actually has the highest percentage of adults participating in peer-to-peer learning? Yep, that's absolutely right. So excellent. So and is anyone able to say what is the reason that Sweden is able to have such a higher involvement rate in adult peer-to-peer learning? Feel free to answer by raising your hand or putting in the chat. It feels a bit ironic for Laura and I to be giving a presentation about peer-to-peer learning, so we would absolutely love if anyone wants to engage in discussion via the chat or raising your hand.
We do have an individual who'd like to be taken off of mute. If you could go ahead, Isaac Egri, when I take you off of mute, introduce yourself and let you know where you're from. And you're taken off of mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I was in Europe doing my executive MBA, but I just completed, so I'm back to South Africa. This topic is very interesting enough because already we've started a project with the MBA graduate. A few of us started a project which is in line with peer-to-peer learning, and actually we're developing a virtual platform which will be online for entrepreneurs worldwide. And what we're doing with this virtual platform is to put tools and resources there for them to be able to scale up their businesses. So I find this very interesting. Excellent. And I also want to learn more. On this virtual platform, we'll have investors, we'll have mentors. I will be a mentor to these entrepreneurs because I'm a social entrepreneur myself. So I'll be of a help, and we're doing it in collaboration, if possible, with the World Bank, so that we'll have investors and other mentors also online to assist this. But not only that, the entrepreneurs themselves will also help each other in facilitating the growth of their businesses. Probably they will, as they probably do business together, and also as pertaining questions which is pertaining to their businesses with each other. So excellent. That is, yeah, that's what we're trying to do here in South Africa.
That sounds great, Isaac, and I wish you the best of luck with that. That sounds excellent. So I just wonder if you're in your time in Europe, did you happen to come across maybe the answer to the last poll question about why Sweden has the highest percentage of adult peer-to-peer learners in the world, and what method is it that they're using. Did you come across anything?
No, not exactly. I always thought it's the United States doing that, but it's my first time hearing in Sweden. So
okay, excellent. Well,
yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing, and we'll get back to your example at the end of the discussion. That's really right in line with what we're here to talk about today. And I also see a hand for William Dent. Is there maybe any chance we could hear from William too?
You're now taken off of mute, William. Please let us know who you are, where you're calling from. Hello, William Don. Unfortunately, it seems we're having a bit of a, we're unable to allow him to the presentation. So
no problem.
If you could go ahead and respond by chat. He did send a comment question. Unfortunately, he doesn't have a mic today. His answer was to the first poll question.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So.
No problem. Okay. Well, we'll just move on. The answer to that question that I just posed of how they're able to achieve this is that actually the government does actually subsidize a national program of study circles for adult learners to come together. And the statistics in Sweden are that 2/3 of adults in their lifetime will participate in study circles, and it's 50% any given year will be participating in a study circle. So really high involvement rates in these study circles. And the really interesting part of the history for Laura and I is that this actually ties back to the U.S. So Isaac, your impression wasn't that off to say that maybe the origin of this type of learning might be in the U.S. More than 100 years ago in the United States, the Chautauqua Institute, which is located in upstate New York, was actually granting 4-year degrees to individuals who convene study circles in their homes across the entire United States. And at the peak of the program in 1915, about 700,000 people per year were participating in it. Most of them were women. And again, like I said, they were actually earning 4-year degrees just by working together in small groups in their homes. They did offer some events in the summer for people to come together in upstate New York, but most of what was happening was in small meeting spaces, churches. And, again, this was really important for access to women to an education long before universities really opened their doors to them. There's a long line that actually connects the kinds of things that were happening at Chautauqua and the Highlander Institute, which is responsible for the education of a lot of our civil rights leaders in the U.S. Rosa Parks, for example, actually was educated on civil action by the Highlander Institute in small study circles before her nonviolent protest. And then, of course, any mention of study circles can't really omit Paulo Freire in Brazil, who again was massively influential in the thinking behind study circles. But the real beneficiary today of all of that thinking in history is Sweden, who has made it a national program. It's mostly forgotten in the United States, actually, in terms of it actually being used in formal systems of education. And then there's one oddball I threw in here, which is not a study circle at all, but a great example. Since 1965, this group at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, called DECAL, that has any given semester, I think this semester they have more than 6,600 students signed up in courses that they've actually proposed themselves, designed themselves, and gotten faculty approval to run for themselves. So anyway, there's a lot that's more than 100 years old going on in this space of peer-to-peer learning. I don't want you to go into today thinking that we're reinventing a new form of learning. But if you could go ahead and advance, Lisa. And even more than 100 years ago, if we if we consider the religious institutions that have used this form of learning, obviously the most common and the oldest form of learning throughout history is small groups of people coming together. You might be familiar with Bible studies. You may have heard of groups like the Baha'i that use study circles exclusively. Many Muslim institutions use study circles for education. So again, this is a very old form of learning. So if we could go ahead and advance again, Lisa. So I want to go into detail about what a study circle is for anyone that maybe hasn't come across it, because these are some key characteristics that could allow you, in any context essentially, to bring a small group together. And you don't have to be calling it a study circle for that to be the case. But there are some important things to keep in mind, such as, for example, different from maybe a lecture format class or even the style that we're engaging in today, really everyone is a teacher and everyone is a learner in a study circle. In a peer-to-peer context, you may nominate a facilitator, for example, to help keep discussion on track, but there really isn't an expert in the room, and that's okay because you're actually relying on the experience and building on the experience that everyone has. The plan is importantly designed by everyone who's participating in it, and that's actually a really hard-seated assumption to get over, we've discovered. That being told that there actually is no syllabus and you have to design it yourselves can be daunting for some people, but also really empowering if you can get over that hurdle. And then I mentioned that it's important to scaffold from your real-life experience. You're focusing on learning from each other rather than from experts. And then the final, just as a reference point, and this isn't necessarily the way that all peer-to-peer learning works, it is pretty common to have manageable chunks of commitment, something like 6 or 8 weeks, maybe 1 or 3 hour sessions at regular times once a week, and small groups that can actually hear and talk to everyone in the group of maybe no more than 3 to 15. We could go ahead and advance, Lisa. If you can keep all of that in mind, the deep history of peer-to-peer, different types of peer-to-peer learning, different arrangements, and I highlighted the study circle in particular, I want you to keep that in mind when we start talking about the new opportunities presented by all of the open courseware that's actually now out on the web, and how those two can be combined in such a fascinating way in our own time. So peer study has always been boosted by a new medium of exchange whenever they come about. So the radio and the television were also, vehicles that helped expand new peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And so just like the Chautauqua Institute was made possible by the availability of books, new opportunities for peer-to-peer learning are being made possible in our own time thanks to just the tremendous amount of resources online. Never before in history has there been so much online that you could access. And the great thing about any of this stuff out there is you don't need anyone's permission to use most of the resources that you'll find and I'll highlight today, because they've actually been, most of them, Creative Commons licensed, which means that you can use them without permission, but maybe just giving reference to where you got them from. There are limitations that I should highlight on some of these resources, that you can't actually use them for commercial use without permission of the original creator. If you can move on, Lisa. So how big is, when I said that there's this massive explosion of resources online and opportunities to learn online and from resources online, I just wanted to give you a sense, maybe some anchors in your mind, of how big we're talking. So I mentioned that radio has helped spur on some of these institutions and vehicles that are out there. So, for example, I highlighted in the top left-hand corner 180,000 are the number of students taking courses from the Open University, which actually started more than 30 years ago in the UK as courses by radio, and now has grown to include mostly online courses. And it's actually the largest producer of MBAs in the UK, with 1 out of 5 MBAs being produced by Open University. 45,000 is the number of users every day on the on the China Department of Education's Big Sky initiative, which is a peer-to-peer educational learning materials exchange network in China created by the government. 1 million is actually the dollar amount in U.S. dollars of some of the salaries of the best paid teachers on a program called Mega Study in South Korea. Hardly mentioned at all. They don't even have an English website for you to learn any more about them. But a highly successful program in South Korea where anyone can offer to be a teacher in a certain subject and get students or tutors to work with them. 20 is the percent of U.S. higher education students participating in an online course in the most recent survey that was done by the Sloan Consortium. So that's 2 or 3 years old, but the most recent figure we have, 1 out of 5 U.S. students. And 30%, which is particularly interesting at the moment in our economy, is the growth rate of the online education business, and that includes online textbooks. So we're talking about a very big explosion of materials and resources online and ways to combine them. If you could mind moving on. Of course, the one that comes to mind instantly for everyone is MIT OpenCourseware. So I just wanted to re-engage you all quickly with a poll about MIT OpenCourseware. And I wonder if you could tell me who is the largest user group of MIT OpenCourseware to date? Excellent. So you all have are very familiar with this topic, and it's good to see that you're able to identify the largest group that's using MIT OpenCourseware. That's correct. And the answer in terms of the statistics is that 43% of users of MIT OpenCourseware are, in fact, self-learners. But the real question is, next, for which group was MIT OpenCourseware primarily designed and intended? That's absolutely right. So the actual statistic is that 9% of users of MIT OpenCourseware to date are educators. But as you all are aware, the original intention of MIT OpenCourseware was actually for educators to learn better practices from other professors and institutions, and so it's taken even them by surprise who's ended up being the biggest user group of MIT OpenCourseware. If you could go ahead and advance, Lisa. This is a common theme we've noticed with open education resources, that you can be surprised by what the original intention versus the actual use ends up being. And one that we feel very strongly about, to bring this full circle to the beginning of the presentation, is the combination of those resources with face-to-face interaction. And this sometimes gets called hybrid learning. You're probably familiar with that term. It seems that everyone on this call is very familiar with this topic. So I won't spend too much time talking about it, but I will highlight 2 reasons why we think this is an important use of open education resources that that maybe wasn't part of the original intention, but is starting to be understood in more detail in terms of its importance. So one is a Department of Education meta-study that was conducted in 2008, looking at all studies that they could bring together on the question of open learning and of online learning, and it was actually found that online learning was actually being more effective than totally face-to-face learning. But in addition to that, a combination that included both online and well-structured offline learning, so ended up being called hybrid learning, was actually more effective than either of the 2 options combined. And that makes sense intuitively if you can imagine that you could have self-paced learning with any of the best resources in the world online, but then the ability to come together in a strong face-to-face community. And that may be the reason why Bill and Melinda Gates, in their annual foundation letter a year ago, did say that this is the year in their mind where the best innovations they're going to see coming out of education are going to be combining face-to-face with online educational resources. And we feel the same way. If you don't mind advancing one more time, Lisa. We feel the same way because there is an importance when you think about the ability in the small group to see each other face-to-face, to build a social support network around it. It's really only in the face-to-face context where you have that same social support that you would have at a college-level course at a university. And it's really only in that context that you're developing deeper ways of thinking and character, things like cooperation and empathy. So we all know that learning isn't just about downloading knowledge from experts, but actually understanding yourself and your tribe better. And that was corroborated by that same DOE study that was indicating that maybe the reason that they were seeing more effective results from hybrid learning versus strictly online or strictly face-to-face learning was that students completing cooperative learning tasks together face-to-face in addition to the online work were tending to have higher academic test scores, higher self-esteem, greater numbers of positive social skills, fewer stereotypes of individuals of other races and ethnic groups, and greater comprehension of the content and skills they were studying. So there's nothing stopping you really today from going on to iTunes U or Folk Semantic and finding some great videos and learning from them on your own. But we really did want to highlight the importance of not forgetting some of these old models of peer-to-peer learning that we highlighted in the beginning. And if you really want to take it full advantage of the resources that are out there, you might want to think about combining some of those centuries-old technologies like study circles with some of these newer resources like videos on the web. If you want to advance one more time, and actually Laura and I have found that it really helps to give an example. So we're going to talk through a quick example, or Laura is more specifically, and I'll have to pass it over to her.
Great, thanks Alan. Hi everybody. So like Alan said, this is a really wonderful example of how Citizen Circles, a particular model of offline and online learning combined, can create really powerful environments for people to learn social innovation skills specifically. And the person that you see right here participated in the first Citizen Circle that we organized together.
Laura?
Social innovation education. And that was a really wonderful, yes.
I'm sorry, you just broke up. Maybe that was just me. Can everyone hear Laura okay? Lisa, is that all right?
No, unfortunately she was breaking up as well. So Laura, try again, and if you break up, I'll have Adam take over, or Alan take over, and then you can maybe call in using the phone. But let's go ahead and try again.
Okay, great. I'm sorry, everyone. So as I was saying, this individual is a really great example of the power of Citizen Circles or any other offline, online learning combination for social innovation education skills development. Can you all hear me better now? Was
Great.
that clear?
Yep.
Okay, good. So with this student's particular case, she participated in our original Citizen Circle that we organized, Social Innovation in Education. And that was a really great, diverse group of people who came together over 7 different countries. And her experience through that Citizen Circle inspired her to become a teacher. So she's now pursuing that, and she's gone on to lead her own Citizen Circle on women as social innovators. And so this is really what Citizen Circles in particular embodies. It's about leveraging your social network to create small groups that learn skills for social change together, using OpenCourseWare and using these different resources and tools that are online, and then connecting with other people through the new technology available to us today. Lisa, could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So I first want to talk a little bit about the original Citizen Circle, Social Innovation in Education. I originally had an interest in social innovation education. I was creating curriculum for a class at Tulane University. And like what we talked about before, like it was really important to get this available out through open technology. So to make it more effective and more available to other people. So when Alan and I went to a conference in China, we asked people would there be interest in participating in this with us. So people form small groups in different communities in China and in Europe and all over the world. And we engaged in this curriculum together. And some really wonderful things happened. People started a lot of great projects out of the course. There's a Club for Crazy Ideas started at a university in China, and one Chinese student decided to build a library. And then other people thought about like what their career paths could be or made career changes, and it was really interesting to see what came out. So that's resulted in a group of other new courses available this semester that small groups are organizing in different parts of the world, but then making available to others so that they can connect through Skype or through whatever other sort of technology to go through this learning together. So you can see here one example is conflict resolution. There's education politics in America. That's another Citizen Circle student who decided to go on and create her own. Local open government innovation, sustainability studio, and women as social innovators, the one that this individual designed. Next slide, please. So the way that this has really worked well, it's been able to connect a lot of really great different groups, organizations, and resources. So behind each Citizen Circle course is essentially an ecosystem of groups supporting the learning that is happening. We wanted to make really great quality social innovation education available not only to elite institutions but to everyday people who might not be in university. So this model really allowed people to organize small groups to create this effective social innovation learning. And through groups like Peer-to-Peer University and other technology platforms, this material that these groups have been creating has been made available to even more people all over the world, and it's created a positive feedback loop.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. So we'd be happy to go into more detail about how each of those citizen circles formed and came about. But essentially, they were ideas that started with nothing more than a group of people saying, well, I'm passionate about, for example, in the pilot course, social innovation in education. And we were essentially able to empower these groups to say, well, then what would we want to learn about if we wanted to tackle social innovation in education and find resources, find activities we could do together. We decided that we would spend a week doing a root cause analysis of problems in our social innovation, in our local education setting. We decided to have a week to review case studies of great innovators in social innovation in education. We decided that participants in the course should be participating in their local education system via work or volunteering during the course, and all these things came about in a totally peer-to-peer fashion, and that's what's inspired these other ones. And so we've essentially created a network where those can stream, one citizen circle can stream into other citizen circles. So of course you're all invited to join in, as you saw on the last slide, or to suggest and help create some of your own. And I just wanted to highlight for you to have something really tangible to take away from this, that I do feel that when we think about open learning and peer-to-peer learning, we sometimes limit ourselves to thinking about the left-hand side of this slide. So I'm sure you all probably know about big meta-search databases where you can find great resources like lectures and syllabi, video, even quizzes, tests, things like that on connections, platforms like iTunes U. I mentioned Folk Semantic, Academic Earth you saw on a previous slide, subject focus silos like Khan Academy you're most likely aware of. But also don't forget that any sort of media can actually make for a great peer-to-peer learning experience. TED Talks actually seems to be a very popular one, at least in Laura and I's work, to get a group together and have a learning experience together, starting with a TED Talk. There are for-profit companies in this space that are nevertheless doing innovative things, like the Teaching Company, for example, that will take any given topic such as religions of the 17th century Western Europe and find the best person, the best lecturer they can in the world on that topic and record them and produce videos, podcasts, and online distribution of those resources as well. People like Flat World Knowledge are great to know of for open educational textbooks that are free to use. There is a cost to print and send them. And don't forget books. That's one of the best resources that we still have. So those are great, but I do want you to leave today hopefully with the idea that when you think about peer-to-peer learning, don't just think about the resources, but probably the much more valuable resource you have, which is your social network, and how you can use that to create a great learning experience. So I've highlighted a bunch here, and I won't necessarily read it. I'm happy to answer questions. But I will say down at the bottom, don't forget that you don't necessarily even need any technology at all. If you have a dinner club, if you have a bicycling group that gets together, if you are interested in learning with something with your coworkers that you see every day, even if it's not in a formal classroom, the people that you work with at school, these are all groups that could become small study groups to learn together. So don't forget about that really important resource. And I guess just with that, we started the conversation asking, what do you think peer-to-peer learning is? And I might reopen that question again, but with an emphasis on how do you think that you could use something like peer-to-peer learning either personally or professionally? And I would actually deeply like to hear from each of you if I could. If you want to send any questions by chat or answers to that by chat or raise your hand, I'd love to hear from you now if you've learned something new today or have some new ideas about how peer-to-peer learning could be helpful to you.
Well, thank you so much, Alan and Laura. That was very interesting. I'd like to start out the questions and again encourage everyone to either raise their hand to be taken off of mute or send a question via chat. My first question is, what do you think are the top 3 things that would make a peer-to-peer learning group successful? What do you think are the key top 3 ingredients that would really engage the participants?
Sure. I think the language is a surprisingly important one. So I'll highlight that one first because you can actually set an entirely different tone for a peer-to-peer learning context that you're creating by using words like syllabus or course or teacher. So I would say that the number one most important thing to keep in mind is that you actually set the entire tone. And Laura and I have discovered some alternatives, things like that, like even just saying a plan instead of a syllabus feels like it's a little bit more flexible. Or a menu of options or activities feels a little bit more flexible for people. Saying things like facilitator or even host for the meeting can help reiterate the idea that there's not actually an expert leading. And so those are some things to keep in mind. And if you want to have other people join that maybe aren't part of it, something like a guest can help be clear what their relationship to the group is. I will say a second thing as well is that you'll want to keep, even though it's important to have everyone involved, because everyone knows that if you want to have a group stay engaged to an idea, you want them to be invested in it from the beginning and help design it. So it is important to have participation in the design of these, but I will say that it's not a good idea to start off with, okay, well, let's have an open discussion and have absolutely no prompt at all. It's important to start with some sort of seed that you can iterate from. So to say, well, I've been thinking we might meet and talk for 6 weeks. Does that sound manageable for everybody? Or do you think that maybe we can't accomplish everything in 6 weeks and we might try 8 weeks? Or I think a good topic of discussion for the first week will be this. What do you all think? So it is good to give some sort of anchor when designing or creating these sorts of things. And then maybe a third thing to keep in mind is that manageable and predictable commitments are good. So that's one reason why something like 6 or 8 weeks, 1 to 3 hour sessions are important. If you're going to organize something like this, and you can actually have groups say that our meeting time is going to be consistently Thursday at 3 p.m. for the duration of this course, it helps people schedule around it in the rest of their life. thanks for the question.
Great, thank you. We have another Isaac Egri would like to be taken off of mute again, and then we have a few more questions coming in by chat. I'll go ahead and take Isaac off of mute to respond. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. That was very, very great presentations. I have this question. Since we're new in this kind of development, we struggling with creating interest groups, but then we also find difficult whether to just create the interest or allow the participant themselves to start a conversation. And then again, the content that we want to put there, we don't know basically like how to design this content, because these are really we targeting those more from the marginalized communities to assist in scaling up their businesses. So with the content, we're thinking of making it basic for it to be understandable by everyone. But then again, we're also considering being professional also. So once again, we're struggling there as well. So I would like to ask you, what is the best way of going about on all this, developing this kind of peer-to-peer learning platform?
So I'll just thanks. Those are great questions, and it's the fact that you're struggling with those things are really indicative to me that you're on the right path of just starting and experimenting. And I will say that Laura and I are by no means experts on the best way to do this, but we just have some experience trying lots of different things. And the same thing will most likely be true for you. And Laura, I wonder if you want to jump in at all. Laura and I aren't sitting in the same place, so it's hard for us to coordinate who to answer each question, but feel free to jump in.
Yeah, it's difficult too, because I understand your challenge with the content in particular, especially if you're working with a group to develop knowledge, because that's something where rather than having people engage with each other and make discoveries, almost like you don't know what you don't know. So that is a challenging thing. But I would say for other stuff, for more intangible skill and confidence development that people need to make their businesses successful, I would say give more power to the people you're working with to develop their own content and have those conversations and be the lead on doing that, because they'll have more ownership of what your initiative is anyway, if that's the way you go.
Isaac, I don't know if does that answer your question? Does that help at all?
Give me just a moment to take him off of mute.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I like the idea of, yeah, it does. I like the idea of the ownership, and then allowing the participants themselves to engage with us, and then most especially, I think I proposed this before, that we should allow the participant more to actually start a conversation or provide us with what actually they want. So I think it's a laudable one. I'll take that.
Great. All right, I have another question that's come in that I'll go ahead and read. It says, this approach is built on a democratic, non-hierarchical cultural value. Many parts of the world see interactions more hierarchically and are more comfortable with that, for example, Confucian learning. How do you make this approach effective when people are coming from that perspective?
Sure. So I can actually say that we have experience with helping organize these kinds of groups in South China in particular, which is a heavily Confucian influence historically area of the world. And as you know, South China is also influenced heavily by the U.S. So there could be some mix of cultures going on there. But with the students we've been working with, it's actually been an empowering experience. To maybe for the first time be told that they could take ownership of and direct their learning plans and things like that. I was actually working in Tibet this summer on opportunities for high school and late middle school age students to learn about social entrepreneurship from this context we created of sort of a summer camp. And actually I can see my own failures and successes in that relating to how much I empowered the students or not to direct their own learning, even in that context, which is heavily, if their formal education system, as you know, is heavily emphatic about authority to the teacher in the room. But nevertheless, the lessons where I just tried to impart knowledge of any sort, it was very hard to get engagement. But the lessons where I said, okay, well, today we're going to actually talk about creating any business you want to, and we're going to elect our own boss for that business, and we're going to have to figure out what our customers want, and those sorts of questions actually then created the opportunity for students to want to learn the rest of the stuff that I wanted them to learn. So I don't think that's actually a barrier that I've come across, at least in that setting of in Tibet and in China, where Confucian philosophy is the backdrop of how they have the current education system set up. I still think empowerment is empowerment anywhere in the world. It feels good to be respected and to be told that your opinion matters, and you're going to be more invested in something if you help design it.
Okay, we have another question come in. How can peer-to-peer work in places with less connectivity? Lots of resources online are as noted, but how can people offline access these?
Excellent question. So an example that I would direct you towards to see a great example of what you're asking about happening is the Swedish Cooperative Center. And this is a group that's actually taken the ideas they've seen so effectively working in Sweden in study circles for their own population applied in an international development context. So they've actually developed sort of field guides or resources that can be used to talk about things like financial literacy, agricultural methods, things like that. And they're mostly all of these study circles that they're running in South Asia and Africa and South America are all being done totally offline. And like I said in the summary slide, it's important not to forget about the importance of things like books. Almost any resource you can find online, you can find a way to have printed. Things like videos, you don't have to be necessarily literate to use or take advantage of. So there are in fact lots of ways that you can use, that you can organize this sort of peer-to-peer learning without access to an internet connection. Anyway, I think I could probably ramble if I keep going, so I'll stop there.
Okay, another question. Are there successful models of international organizations that have a peer learning as a core function within the organization? And I would like to open this up to the entire audience as well as our presenters. Do you know of any successful models of international organizations? If you do, go ahead, send it via the chat function, and I can go ahead and share it with everyone. While I'm waiting for responses, I'll also propose that to the presenters.
Sure, I'm curious to see what answers come back. It's not an international organization, but I learned of an organization called Mohawk College in Canada, not far from Toronto, so in Ontario last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago when I was there, that actually uses study circles internally in terms of setting policy and direction for the organization, in terms of offering support to students outside of classes and things like that.
I haven't seen too many other responses, so I'll go ahead and leave that open if you can think of a successful model of an international organization using peer learning. So it's Mohawk. I'm sorry, could you say that again, Alan?
Mohawk, yes. M-O-H-A-W-K, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm waiting for a few more questions. We talked about the three practices or principles that help make a successful peer learning group. In your experience with peer learning group, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the barriers that have made groups less successful?
Yeah, sure. I think again, I just want to highlight the challenges that language poses. the choice of words and how you frame it, particularly if you're using words that relate to or have the baggage of an formal education experience in someone's mind, like syllabus. You can actually potentially scare a participant away because what they're conjuring up is this 3-credit course where they were graded by their peers, and they were graded by an expert, not their peers. They were had to put a tremendous amount of time into that sort of stuff. So language is very important. Laura, is there anything else that you wanted to highlight?
Yeah, I would say there's a challenge as well with people trying to put too much into their course plan, and it becomes overwhelming and burns out and has a lot of commitment requirements of the people that are involved. So it's important when you create these not to overplan and to cram too much into one course plan. I know that was a challenge that I've had before.
Great, and I would also open the opportunity for any participants who have successfully participated in a peer learning group to also send in by question via chat any of the challenges you've faced. I have another question. How can peer-to-peer learning work for more hands-on type of learning? For example, teaching a cooking course or playing the piano?
Yep. So there are actually some really great examples we've come across of that sort of context. I'd like to highlight, for example, Escuela Nueva in Colombia that has done some really incredible, very participatory work with students where they're helping design their own learning, but it's very practically oriented. I'm going to have to look up the name of this group that we met in Beijing this summer. That actually in India is using a participatory design model to help students learn practical building skills, design skills, things like that, and using that information to help launch their own businesses. And so they're learning entrepreneurial skills. They're learning how to do things like weld, and then with that skill, they're able to go and launch businesses. And I'm sorry that I can't remember the name of it, but if anyone is very interested in that, I can send you an email afterwards. And then I'll just bring up one of the examples that was on that summary slide as well, too, of groups like Skillshare, and there's another one called the School of Everything. There's smaller groups we've seen. Even things like meetup groups. There are examples of, if your interest is just actually learning a skill from someone that you just want to teach you that skill, there are great avenues for doing that, where you can advertise your competence in teaching something, and you can look for other people that are doing the same. Find someone that can teach you how to play the violin or whatever your interest is. Those aren't in every place in the world, but the model is very simple and can be replicated almost anywhere where you have a social network. So yeah.
Great. Thank you both. I do want to mention again that both this presentation as well as the PowerPoint presentation will be available to you after the webinar. Alan and Laura's information will also be shared with you so you can continue the conversation with them. We have about 5 more minutes of the discussion. I have a few more questions coming in. If we don't get to all the questions, I would encourage you also to be in contact with Alan or Laura, who I'm sure would be thrilled to continue the conversation. So here's another question. We mentioned hybrid models involving online and face-to-face learning. What about hybrids of peer learning as elements within more traditional teacher-led courses? Or would that be the contrary to the fundamental definition of peer-to-peer that you are using?
That would be a great one for Laura to answer. We've had actually experience with that specifically.
Yeah, I think if it's done properly, it isn't contradictory. Often a lot of teachers view themselves more as a facilitator, and they'll share the knowledge and make that available, but also incorporate peer learning. And peer learning has been used as a learning approach and learning tool for a very long time in lots of different traditional K-12 classes as well as university classes. And we've actually had a lot of experiences, citizen circles, working with university classes at Tulane to create components of peer-to-peer social innovation learning within the class that also includes parts that have lecture in them as well. And then also I know we've worked with a few different school systems that have been, of course, providing traditional education, but also want to incorporate more peer-to-peer learning in their classes.
Great, thank you. And another question is, there seems to be a lot of e-tools that you've mentioned. Are there just one or two, or perhaps the top 3 that you have used consistently and could recommend as your top tools that you've used?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, and I don't think a year ago, if we had been trying to design it this way, we could have even predicted this would be the case. But TED Talks seems to be one of the most powerful ways to bring people together. They're small, manageable chunks of very well done presentations and high quality and very thought-provoking. So we do go back to TED as a resource almost more than anything else out there. And surprisingly, with all of these, if you're seeing on the slide all these social tools like OpenStudy and Grocket and Moodle and Nixty and Sakai and all these sorts of things, we actually, most of our current Citizen Circle-based courses you can take are on peer-to-peer university, and if you're very sort of savvy as a technology user, a lot of people are liking that and using that well. But surprisingly simple and effective tends to be Google Groups as well. The 2 tools we end up using more than anything on this list are TED Talks and Google Groups. Just simple and effective.
Great, thank you. Another question. I had a wonderful experience learning Japanese some years ago using Caleb Gadetno's community language learning approach. Have you done any work with this kind of learning circle with an expert resource?
So we have paired experts into citizen circles in specific ways without them becoming the focal point of it. So I do think that the kind of model you're describing is very helpful when it comes to language education. It's really hard to replicate just the importance of being told this pronunciation is right or not by a native speaker of the language you're trying to learn. And we haven't done any language-based citizen circles or that sort of thing. However, we have been able to, in different subjects like conflict resolution, had most of the design and development of the course be led in a peer-to-peer fashion. But then in addition to that, have an expert like Ambassador McDonald from the Institute for Multi-Track Diplomacy look over the design and say, well, have you considered these resources? Have you considered using this discussion question that week? Or, by the way, I've tried to cover that topic, and here's some problems you'll probably run into. And then even join the Citizen Circle as a guest later on, which both helps serve as an incentive for students being involved in it, and as a way for them to get to ask questions to someone with a great deal of experience in that field. And that can all be done in a way that's not disempowering.
Great. Well, it's now 10:30. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Alan and Laura especially for bringing more attention and focus to open education and peer-to-peer learning. I would invite you to continue the discussion and send any questions to us or to the presenters. We'll also make sure that all of these resources are available to you. And I'd also encourage, Alan, if you could go ahead maybe and perhaps on this list be a little bit, there seems to be a lot of interest on the resources, and maybe add some websites as well, so when we send out the information, they can access them as well. So
Great,
thank you again, everyone. The webinar is now over. Thank you for joining us.